They say the mountains keep their own secrets, secrets buried in fog, whispered through trees, and carved into the silence where no roads go. But what if the missing were never lost at all, only waiting for us to follow? The trail should have been simple. I had walked parts of it before, knew its bends and inclines, the way the trees closed in overhead until the sunlight only trickled down like thin veins of gold. But that morning, the path felt wrong. It was as though the forest had shifted in the night. Branches leaning closer, the ground subtly altered beneath my boots. When I stopped to check the blazes painted long ago on the trees, I realized they no longer followed the map in my pack. The paint was scratched away, replaced with strange, crude arrows carved deep into the bark, all of them pointing farther into the woods. At first, I laughed at it. Maybe local kids with too much time, or someone trying to play tricks on hikers. But the more I followed the arrows, the less certain I became. They weren't scattered like graffiti. They were methodical, deliberate, carved with patience. I set down my pack and checked my compass. The needle spun in tight, useless circles, never settling on north. The air around me felt heavy, as if every breath carried damp weight. I told myself to turn back, retrace my steps, but when I tried to look behind me, the trail was not the same. The markers I had passed before were gone, the trees unmarked, the ground disturbed in a way that erased where I had come from. It was then I realized I was alone in a way I had never felt before. Not just without people, but without the certainty of place, as though the forest itself had sealed behind me. I moved forward because there was nowhere else to go, though each step sank heavier into the soil, as if something below waited for me to stumble. After an hour, I found the first thing that didn't belong. A leather boot, cracked and warped from rain, but not rotted. Its laces were tied, as though the foot had slipped out of it mid-stride. Around it, the earth was bare of tracks. My skin prickled, and I left it where it was, though a part of me wanted to search for the other. Farther on, I found a scarf tangled in brambles. It looked new, fabric bright, untouched by mold or time. I should have turned around then, should have forced myself through the brush to find a road or river. But the forest had grown impossibly silent. No birds, no rustle of deer, not even wind through the branches. It was silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat like a drum inside my skull. And beneath it, faint, a rhythm not my own. Somewhere ahead, deeper where the arrows pointed, something moved. I felt it before I saw it. The weight of eyes, the hush of steps timed to match my own. I should have turned back, but the arrows led me on, and some part of me already knew they weren't guiding me toward safety. They were guiding me to join the others who had never walked back out. Beneath the sagging limbs of a rotting oak, I stumbled upon a collection of things that should never have been there. At first, I thought some careless hiker had left behind trash. But as I crouched closer, the air seemed to thicken and the details sharpened. Shoes lay side by side, their laces neatly tied. Pages from a diary, the ink still sharp, fluttered faintly in the faintest breeze that did not seem to reach the surrounding trees. And then, glinting in the half-light, a driver's license pressed into the damp soil. I wiped the dirt away with my thumb, and my stomach dropped. Her name stared back at me, a woman who had vanished from these very mountains 5 years ago. I remembered her face from the news, the missing posters stapled to telephone poles, her smile frozen in time. Yet here were her belongings, untouched by weather or decay, as though they had been placed only moments before I arrived. The diary's paper was crisp, not softened by rain or mold. The shoes bore no moss, no gnaw marks from animals. They were waiting, perfectly arranged, as though someone had known I would pass by. My breath clouded in front of me, though the air was not cold. I turned the pages with shaking hands, the words scrawled in hurried ink. "Someone is following me," one line read. Another, "I hear them in the trees." The last page ended mid-sentence. The ink streaked as though the pen had been ripped away mid-thought. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as if her unfinished sentence was being written still, somewhere behind me. I dropped the diary and spun, but nothing stirred. Only the oak loomed above me, its trunk hollow and blackened, like a mouth frozen mid-scream. I stuffed the license into my pocket, though I don't know why. Some desperate urge to carry proof that what I was seeing was real. The silence of the woods pressed tighter, and every shadow between the trees felt alive. I should have walked away, retraced what little sense of trail remained. But the ground ahead bore faint indentations, the suggestion of more belongings scattered farther on, as though the forest had laid a breadcrumb trail made not of bread, but of the lives it had taken. My legs moved before I could think, pulling me deeper, as though the woman's unfinished story demanded I follow where she had gone. Each step felt heavier, the earth soft beneath my boots, clinging like hands that didn't want to let go. And in the quiet, beneath the pounding of my heart, I thought I heard it. A voice, whispering my name in a tone too familiar to belong to a stranger. It came from the direction of the trail of belongings, beckoning me forward. I knew then that she had never left these woods. None of them had. And if I kept following, I would learn why. By nightfall, I had no choice but to stop. My legs trembled from hours of pushing deeper into the woods, and every time I thought I'd found a way out, the trees folded back in, closing like a trap. I cleared a small patch of ground, built a fire from damp branches that smoked more than they burned, and tried to convince myself that the heat and the light meant safety. But even as the flames crackled, the forest pressed close, its silence thicker than the smoke that clung to my clothes. Sleep never came. I lay listening, the diary's last words etched into my mind, each one an echo. Someone is following me. I kept glancing toward the shadows, where the firelight ended and the black of the trees began. It was just after midnight when I first heard it. A whisper, low and wavering, threading through the branches. At first, I thought it was the hiss of my fire. But then I caught the unmistakable shape of my name. Not shouted, but spoken, whispered. I sat up, my heart drumming against my ribs, and called out into the dark, "Who's there?" My own voice sounded brittle, swallowed almost instantly by the night. The whisper cut off. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it. Then came the breathing. Heavy, ragged, close enough that it seemed to circle the fire, though nothing moved beyond the ring of light. I could feel it more than I could hear it. The heat of a presence just out of sight, exhaling like an animal keeping pace with prey. I clutched the driver's license in my pocket, the smooth plastic slick with sweat. My thoughts raced back to the woman, her diary entries that had ended mid-sentence, as if the same thing had happened to her. I told myself it was the wind, some trick of the trees, but the air was still. The fire did not flicker. The breathing did not stop. I added more wood, trying to push back the dark, but the fire seemed smaller, swallowed by the forest instead of fed. Beyond the smoke, the whispers returned, layered now, more than one voice. Some too high, others too guttural to be human, but all repeating my name like a litany. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the trees looked different now, bent and twisted as though they had shifted while I sat still. There was no trail anymore, only shadows. I stayed awake until dawn, staring into the black, afraid that if I blinked, the whispers would step into the light. And as the night crawled on, I realized something worse than being followed. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to scare me away. It was trying to wear me down, the way a predator toys with its prey before the kill. And by the time the sun rose, I was too tired to know if I had already fallen into its trap. When the first light seeped through the canopy, I could not stay another second in that cursed clearing. My fire was nothing but ash, and the memory of the whispers still clung to my skin like frost. I snatched up my pack and ran, not caring which direction my boots carried me, only desperate to escape. But no matter how far I pushed, the trees repeated themselves, bending into the same shapes, their bark etched with the same scars. The trail was gone. Every direction was identical, as though the forest had folded into itself, overnight, sealing me inside. I stopped to catch my breath, hands trembling, and that was when I saw the first pile. A shirt folded with careful precision, and beside it, a pair of reading glasses, their frames unbroken, their lenses clean. 10 paces farther, another offering, a watch gleaming faintly with dew, its hands frozen at a time that meant nothing. Beyond that, a gold wedding ring, perched atop a stone as though displayed. None of these things bore decay or rust. They were preserved, protected, as though waiting to be found. I recognized the pattern almost immediately. They were not scattered by accident. Each pile had been arranged with eerie intent, small memorials to people who had vanished into these woods. I crouched by the ring, my reflection warped in its surface, and thought of the families left behind, of the posters fading on telephone poles, of the unanswered questions. The forest was keeping its trophies. I should have turned back, but there was nowhere left to turn. Every direction held more offerings. Children's shoes, wallets, photographs sealed in plastic sleeves to protect them from rain. Each pile drew me deeper, tugging me along a path not carved by hikers, but by something that had been here long before us. It did not want me to find my way out. It wanted me to see. The air grew colder as I moved from pile to pile. My breath steamed in the dawn light, and the silence was so complete it felt like pressure against my ears. I began to imagine the owners of these items watching from between the trees, their eyes hollow, their mouths shaping my name in that whisper I had heard by the fire. And then I found the last pile. Not an old relic, not something from years past, but a torn scrap of fabric I recognized immediately. My own shirt, the one I had packed at the bottom of my bag. It lay folded neatly on the forest floor, beside my pocket knife and my water flask, though my pack was still slung across my shoulder. The truth struck me in one sickening wave. It wasn't only preserving what it had already taken, it was preparing for what it was about to take next. I was no longer a traveler passing through these woods. I was part of its collection, and there was nothing left ahead but the waiting. My hands shake as I write this by the dwindling glow of a match, the last light I have left. I know now why the forest lured me here. It was never the crude arrows, never the strange piles of belongings that drew me deeper. It was the silence itself, the suffocating quiet that swallowed every footstep of and left me with only the sound of my own heart. Silence that does not belong to nature, but to something older, patient, and hungry. I thought I could resist it. I thought if I kept moving, if I forced myself forward, I might find the edge, a road, a stream that could carry me out. But the trees twisted each path back into itself, looping endlessly until I began to see my own footprints laid fresh before me. as if I had been circling for days, and all the while I was not alone. The breathing returned, steady and close, never more than a step beyond the reach of my sight. Sometimes I hear laughter, too faint to be certain, like the echo of children playing in the distance. But when I call out, it answers with silence, and the silence is worse than the sound. I found another pile just before I sat down to write this. Not jewelry, not shoes, but bones. Small, pale, arranged in a careful spiral. I don't know if they belong to an animal or a person. Maybe that no longer matters. What matters is that they were placed there with the same patience as the wedding rings, the watches, the diary pages. A ritual, a promise, a reminder that everything taken here is remembered, piece by piece. My body is tired in a way that feels deeper than exhaustion. The air grows heavy when I move, as though unseen hands are pressing against my chest, urging me to lie down, to let go. The whispers have stopped speaking my name and begun murmuring in the words I cannot understand. Words that still slide beneath my skin like insects crawling. I am afraid if I listen too long, I will start repeating them myself. So I leave this as my last entry. If you find these words, it means the forest allowed you to come this far, just as it allowed me. Do not follow the arrows. Do not stop when you see the belongings. Do not answer when the voices call. The missing never left. They are here, gathered in the shadows, their eyes fixed on me as I write. I feel them pressing closer, an unseen circle tightening. The match is burning low. The dark waits for me, and I know what comes next. I am part of them now. If you step where I stepped, you will be too. The forest does not forget, and it is waiting. We thought we were invincible, the three of us stomping into that hollow with backpacks full of cheap beer and the kind of arrogance only youth can carry. The locals had told us the place was bad ground, whispered that hunters went missing there, that whole search parties had vanished without leaving footprints. But warnings like that feel more like invitations when you're young and hungry for stories. We wanted to see if fear could bend under our laughter. The hollow lay beyond a ridge where the trees grew tighter, their branches laced like skeletal fingers overhead. We followed an old game trail that looked like it hadn't seen use in decades. The soil damp and unbroken, the air thick with the smell of moss and decay. When we finally reached the bottom, the hollow spread out before us like a bowl, ringed by rock walls and tangled underbrush. It felt sunken, hidden, as though we'd stepped into a place the world had forgotten. At first, the strangeness thrilled us. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birdsong, just the echo of our own voices bouncing back at us. We cracked open beers and joked loudly, trying to fill the emptiness, trying to prove that nothing lived there but us. But the longer we stayed, the less the laughter came naturally. Every word felt too loud, bouncing off the rocks and coming back thinner, weaker, as if the hollow was swallowing our voices instead of returning them. By late afternoon, shadows had already pooled across the floor of the hollow, though the sky above was still pale. The trees along the rim stood like blackened sentinels, and the path we had taken down was suddenly difficult to find. We joked about it at first, forcing nervous laughs. But the jokes didn't stick. The air had changed, denser, colder, heavy with something unseen. We built a fire, though the wood smoked more than it burned, filling the hollow with a haze that seemed to dim the world further. That was when we heard it for the first time. A faint sound, not the crack of a branch or the rustle of leaves, but a murmur. At first, I thought it was one of my friends speaking under their breath. But both of them froze, faces pale, staring into the shadows. The murmur rose again, from somewhere beyond the fire's glow, low and wet, like a voice not shaped for human words. We huddled close, our earlier bravado drained away, replaced by a silence that tasted like fear. None of us wanted to admit we'd heard it. None of us wanted to give it shape by speaking of it aloud. But in that moment, I knew the laughter we had carried into the hollow was gone. The place had taken it from us, and something else was waiting to take more. And as the fire smoked and the murmur circled closer, I realized the locals hadn't lied. They had not warned us to scare us. They had warned us because the hollow whispers, and it was whispering for us. We set out the next morning, trying to convince ourselves that the voices we heard in the hollow were nothing more than tricks of smoke and nerves. The sun broke weakly through the trees, but the light didn't feel like it reached us, didn't seem to belong. My two friends walked ahead, their chatter forced, brittle, as though each word was a charm meant to hold back something that pressed in closer the quieter we became. Then, just beyond the bend of a moss-choked ridge, we stumbled into a scene that made our forced laughter die in our throats. The campsite sat in a small clearing, 3 tents arranged neatly, their zippers drawn shut. Plates rested on stumps as makeshift tables, half-finished meals still steaming in the cool morning air. Tin mugs of coffee were half drained, the surface rippling as if only moments ago they had been set down. It was not the ruin of a camp abandoned days earlier. It was fresh, alive with the residue of whoever had been here. And yet, there was no one. No boots, no voices, no figures moving between tents. Just the ghost of activity that had stopped mid-motion. The air grew heavy in my lungs, thick as syrup, and I couldn't shake the sense that it carried echoes we could not hear. My friends whispered about search parties, maybe hikers who had fled in a hurry, but their voices betrayed them. The food was warm. Whoever had been here was here only minutes ago. Something had taken them so fast that even the fire hadn't gone out. I shone my flashlight toward the ridge wall that rose at the edge of the clearing. That was when I saw them. The carvings. Spirals etched deep into the stone, overlapping like tangled fingerprints. At first, they seemed ancient, weathered, but as the beam of my light moved across them, they seemed to shiver. The spirals gleamed wet, though no rain had fallen, and when I reached out with trembling fingers to touch the stone, the grooves pulsed. Not like stone, like flesh. A throb passed beneath my hand, faint but unmistakable, a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. The stone itself seemed to breathe, and the spiral beneath my palm warmed as though it recognized me. My vision swam, and for a moment the clearing disappeared, the tents gone, the food vanished. All I could see was the spiral, turning and turning, pulling me inward until I thought I might tumble headfirst into its endless coil. One of my friends yanked me back, breaking the contact, and I stumbled against the cold earth, gasping. The carvings lay still once more, inert and silent. But I knew what I felt. The rock remembered, the air remembered, the hollow remembered. And whatever had taken those campers had not left this place empty. It had left an invitation carved into stone, waiting for us to touch, to follow, to join. We stayed awake as long as we could that night, huddled around the weak glow of our fire. The memory of that abandoned camp clung to us, the spirals carved into stone pulsing in my thoughts like a phantom heartbeat. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of branch outside the circle of light set us on edge. But exhaustion eventually dulled our vigilance. One by one we gave in, though none of us truly slept. It was more like drifting in uneasy fits, minds half aware, ears straining for the sound of something approaching. When I jolted awake, the fire had burned low, embers glowing like dying eyes in the ash. My first instinct was to glance at my friends. One lay curled tight in his sleeping bag, his breath shallow, dreamless. The other space was empty. I sat up so fast the world tilted around me. His boots were still placed neatly beside the bag, the laces tied just as he had left them. But the bag itself sagged hollow, the zipper pulled halfway down. There had been no sound, no rustle, no cry. He was simply gone, erased as cleanly as the hikers at that other camp. The air was colder than before, cold enough that my breath fogged, even though the season should not have allowed it. My skin prickled with the kind of dread that lives deeper than fear, the instinct that knows a predator waits in the dark. I whispered his name, at first soft, then louder, but the trees threw it back at me in muffled echoes. That was when I heard it. His voice, faint but sharp enough to cut through the silence. It was not ahead of me or behind me, but everywhere, drifting through the hollow. Don't follow. The words cracked, as if spoken through water, strained and warped. But it was him. My blood ran cold, my chest tight as if invisible hands gripped me. I wanted to rush into the trees to find him, to drag him back. But the warning rooted me to the spot. My remaining friend stirred, confused, rubbing his eyes. But when I told him what I heard, his face went pale. He whispered that it couldn't have been real. But the look in his eyes betrayed that he had heard it too. We did not sleep after that. We sat with our backs to each other, the dying fire between us, listening to the hollow breathe around us. Every so often, the voice returned, always fainter, always further away, pleading, warning. I don't know if it was truly him or something else wearing his voice like a mask. But I knew the truth then. The hollow does not take with violence. It steals without sound, without struggle, slipping people away like shadows. And once it has them, it does not let them go. It only lets them speak enough to remind those left behind what waits in the dark. By dawn, we could not bear it any longer. The hollow pressed against us like a weight, the loss of our friend carved into the silence that lingered over the dying coals. We packed in frantic silence, hands trembling, and without speaking, we made the decision to leave. There was no trail in sight, but we thought if we kept pushing toward the ridge, we would find the road. The sun hung pale and distant above us, but even daylight felt fragile here, like it could be snuffed out by the forest at any moment. We ran. Branches lashed against our faces, thorns tore at our clothes, but neither of us slowed. My heart hammered in my throat, and still, I felt eyes watching from the trees. The ground beneath us seemed to tilt and shift, every path winding back to where we had started, no matter how far we pushed forward. Each clearing we stumbled into was one I swore I had already crossed. It was as though the forest itself had folded into a labyrinth, bending space and time to keep us here. My friend was just ahead of me. No more than 10 paces, his backpack bouncing, his breath ragged. I could see him clearly, every movement real and solid. I called out, urging him not to stop, promising we would make it out. But then, in the space between one blink and the next, he was gone. No sound, no struggle, no scream. The path before me was empty, the trees swaying gently as though they had just closed around him. I skidded to a halt, my stomach dropping into a pit of cold terror. My voice cracked as I screamed his name. But only the forest answered, whispering echoes that sounded too much like laughter. I clawed at the underbrush where he had been, desperate for any sign. That was when I saw it. His flashlight lay on the ground, the beam still glowing faintly in the gray light of morning. It was upright, balanced on its end, as though it had been placed there deliberately. I picked it up with shaking hands, and the moment my fingers touched the metal, the air grew colder, the shadows around me deepening until they seemed to reach toward me. The light felt wrong in my hand, as if it wasn't just an object, but a message. I knew then what the hollow wanted. It was not chaos. It was not chance. Every disappearance was deliberate, chosen, collected. The belongings left behind were not accidents. They were markers, tokens, reminders. My friend had not simply vanished. He had been claimed. I stood alone in that shifting maze of trees, gripping the glowing light that had belonged to him, knowing I was next. The hollow had taken two, and now it was circling back for me. I don't remember how I got out. One moment, I was stumbling through the labyrinth of trees, clutching that still glowing flashlight, my throat raw from screaming a name no one would ever answer. The next, I was blinking against sunlight that felt too bright, too sharp, as if the world outside the hollow had been waiting for me. Unsure if it should let me through, my legs gave out on the roadside, and I lay there for what could have been minutes or hours before I found the strength to move again. Cars passed eventually. A driver slowed, asked if I needed help, but the words tangled in my mouth. I nodded, climbed into the seat, and stared back at the tree line. The forest loomed like a wall, dark and endless. There was no sign of the hollow, no trace of the spirals or the camps or the two friends who had walked in with me. Just trees. Just silence. Days have passed since then. At least, I think they have. Time feels strange now. I wake in my own bed, in the safety of walls and locks. But it doesn't feel like safety. The hollow came with me. I hear it in the quiet, in the stillness between breaths. At first, it was only when I tried to sleep. A soft murmur, like the wind under the door. But then it grew louder, shaping itself into my name over and over, spoken in the voices of those I lost. I've tried to convince myself it's guilt, that the mind plays cruel tricks after trauma. But guilt doesn't breathe down your neck when you lie in the dark. Guilt doesn't rattle your doorknob at 3 a.m. Last night, when I dared to whisper back, the voices fell silent. And then came the breathing, heavy, close enough that the glass of water on my nightstand rippled. Sometimes I wake and find dirt on the sheets, damp earth scattered across the floor, as though I've been walking in my sleep. The flashlight I brought back lies by my bed, but I swear it wasn't me who left it there. Its beam flickers at night, even when the batteries should be dead. It points toward the corner of the room, and in that corner, the shadows always seem darker, thicker, shifting when I try to stare straight at them. I made it out, or at least I think I did. But the hollow has its hooks in me. My name keeps echoing in the dark when I try to close my eyes, pulling me back to where the spirals wait. They are patient. They are relentless. And I know the truth now. The hollow never gives back what it takes. It only lends you time. Next time, when the voices come, I don't think I'll wake. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road so narrow, the trees scraped the sides of my car as I crawled toward it. My uncle had left it to me, a structure I'd never seen, never heard of until the letter arrived. Locals in the town below had warned me with tight smiles and lowered voices. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed no one who crossed the threshold ever came back down the mountain. I laughed it off, the way anyone laughs at stories meant to frighten outsiders. But the laughter drained from me the moment I opened the door. The air inside was too still, thick with the smell of dust and mildew, yet not as decayed as decades of abandonment should have left it. The boards groaned under my boots, but the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt as though it had been waiting. Shadows clung to the corners like cobwebs, and the walls seemed to lean in closer than they should. I told myself it was just an old house, my nerves twisted by the warnings. But unease crawled through me like ants beneath my skin. I moved from room to room, my flashlight beam slicing through layers of dust. In the kitchen, pots still hung from hooks, their metal dulled but not rusted. On the table, a cracked plate sat in place, as if waiting for a meal that had never been served. I touched it, and the porcelain felt warm, though the air was cold enough to bite. The living room held a single armchair facing the hearth, a blanket draped neatly across the back. The ash in the fireplace was gray and soft, as though the last fire had gone out only yesterday. But no one had been here for years. My heart pounded harder with every detail that didn't belong, every object too preserved, too deliberate. It wasn't a ruin. It was a room prepared for someone's return. Then I opened the door to the bedroom. Unlike the rest of the house, there was no dust here. The bed was freshly made, sheets pulled tight, pillows fluffed as if a caretaker had just stepped out. On the nightstand sat a stack of photographs. At first, I thought they were old family pictures, but as I shuffled through them, my stomach dropped. The images were of strangers, men, women, children, caught in their sleep, mouths slack, eyes closed. They were not posed, they were taken. I flipped one more, and the breath froze in my throat. It was me. I lay in my own bed, the one miles away in my apartment, taken from the angle of the window I always left cracked open at night. The date scrawled on the back was last week. The cabin was not abandoned. It had been watching. It had been waiting. And the moment I stepped inside, I understood the curse was never about the house itself. It was about the bed already prepared for me. The rest of the cabin reeked of age. Walls swollen with mildew, wood damp and rotting, the floor beneath my boots soft as sponge. But the bedroom was different. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It was cleaner, sharper, tinged with the faint smell of linen, as if someone had just pulled fresh sheets over the mattress. The bed was perfectly made, the quilt tucked tight, pillows arranged in careful symmetry. It was not the work of time. It was preparation. I hesitated at the doorway, my skin prickling with a cold that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The room felt lived in, preserved, as if the rest of the house had been left to decay, just to sharpen the contrast. A lure. Something had been maintained for a purpose, and that purpose was me. On the nightstand, a neat stack of photographs waited. The edges were worn from handling, though not yellowed, not aged. I reached for them with a hand I could not keep steady. One by one, I flipped through the images, my stomach tightening with each face. Strangers, all of them. Men, women, children. Every single one lay in bed, captured mid-sleep, their mouths slack, their bodies arranged in vulnerable repose. The photos were intimate, invasive, the kind only someone who stood in the room while they dreamed could take. The more I looked, the worse it became. Some of the rooms looked modern, others decades old. Some faces were pale and sharp, others blurred, as though they had already been fading when the shutter clicked. But all of them shared the same vacant stillness. They had no idea they were being watched. Then I reached the last photo in the stack. The edges trembled in my grip as I turned it over. I knew the room before I even registered the figure. My own bed, my own apartment, the cheap lamp on my nightstand. the window that never quite shut right. And me, sprawled in the sheets, my mouth open slightly, eyes closed, hair pressed flat against the pillow. The angle of the shot was one I had never seen before. From the window, from the darkness just beyond where I always cracked it for air. The date scrawled on the back was not years old. It was last week. My knees nearly gave out as I stared at it. The air in the bedroom seemed to lean heavier on me, like the walls were waiting for me to lie down, to become the next photograph in the stack. I wanted to throw it, to burn it, but my fingers refused to let it go. The cabin was no relic. It was a gallery, and my name had already been written among the collection. I stumbled back from the bed, clutching the photograph so tightly the edges cut into my skin. My only thought was to get out. The door frame gaped behind me, but when I stepped through it, the wood groaned and swung shut of its own accord. The sound of the latch sliding into place echoed like a gunshot in the silence. I rushed to pull it open again, but the knob refused to turn, the brass hot enough to scorch my palm. Heart hammering, I fled to the living room, desperate to throw open a window. The panes rattled under my hands, but they would not lift. I tried another, then another. Each frame stuck fast as though welded into the wall. My breath came fast, fogging the glass, and I pressed my forehead against it. What I saw on the other side made my stomach twist into ice. The forest was gone. Where there should have been trees, where there should have been the faint gold of daylight through leaves, there was nothing. Just blackness, deep and endless, like staring into a sheet of obsidian. And in that smooth dark, my reflection stared back at me. I could see my pale face, my wide, frantic eyes, every desperate breath fogging the glass. But I wasn't alone in the reflection. Behind me, shapes gathered. Figures, half shadowed, half clear, arranged in a loose circle around where I stood. Their features were blurred, but their posture was unmistakable. Watching, waiting. The longer I stared, the more distinct they became. Men, women, children, the very same ones from the photographs. Their mouths hung slack, their eyes unblinking. They filled the room behind me, though when I spun, the cabin stood empty. I pressed my hands flat to the window, begging it to break, to crack, to give me even the smallest escape. But it held firm. The reflection warped, the figures leaning closer, their mouths beginning to move in soundless unison. My own reflection did not mimic me anymore. It smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of lips, something my face could not have formed in that moment of terror. I stumbled back, and every door in the cabin slammed shut at once, the noise rolling like thunder through the halls. The figures in the glass drew nearer until their blurred edges brushed against the outline of my body, their cold presence bleeding into me. My reflection raised its hand when I had not moved. It beckoned. The black glass quivered as if it were water, as if I could step through. And for the first time, I understood the curse. The cabin was not holding me in. It was pulling me over, into the place where the missing already stood. When the sun disappeared, I knew the cabin had no intention of letting me see morning. Shadows crept along the walls like spilled ink, filling corners until there was no difference between the house and the void outside. I sat rigid in the living room, listening for anything beyond the silence. That was when I heard it. The creak of the bed frame. Not the groan of old wood, but a rhythm. Slow, steady, deliberate. It rose and fell like a chest breathing. The bed was alive. I forced myself into the hallway, desperate to flee, desperate to test every exit again. The front door stood there, waiting. But when I wrapped my fingers around the knob, it seared my flesh. The smell of burned skin filled my nose, and I yanked my hand back with a cry. The metal glowed faintly in the dark, pulsing in time with the rhythm of the bed. It wasn't just locked. It was warning me. I was not meant to leave. Eyes dragged toward the bedroom. I swore the quilt shifted on its own, rising and falling like breath. I could almost hear it, the rasp of lungs struggling beneath the sheets. I wanted to run, but the nightstand drew me closer. The stack of photographs stacked too neatly to ignore. With trembling hands, I lifted the top one. It was me. Not from the cabin, not from a place I knew. I was lying in my apartment bed again, except this time my face was turned toward the camera, my mouth slack, my eyes half open, as if I had been stirred, but not woken. I flipped another. Again, me. But my body was angled in ways I had never slept. Arms folded, sheets tangled, as though someone had carefully positioned me like a doll. Another photo showed me curled on the floor, cheek pressed to hardwood I had never touched. The photographs multiplied as I turned them, each one worse than the last. In some, I was thinner, gaunt, with shadows carved into my face. In others, my eyes were open, staring, my mouth twisted into a smile I had never worn. Each scene looked less like a moment captured and more like a rehearsal, a staging. The stack slipped from my shaking hands and scattered across the floor, dozens of images of myself staring back at me. As they fanned outward, the bed gave a long, low sigh, the sheets deflating before rising again. My pulse thundered in my ears. The cabin wasn't just watching me, it was preparing me. The photographs weren't memories, they were blueprints. And the bed, shifting like a living chest in the dark, was waiting for me to lie down and fit the shapes it had already chosen. I don't know how many nights have passed. Time doesn't move the same way here. The windows never show daylight, only that black glass reflecting my face with shadows gathering behind me. The doors no longer rattle when I try them. They don't even pretend to be doors now, just smooth walls that mock the idea of escape. I have given up bruising my hands against them. The cabin wants me here, and it has patience enough to wait forever. I tried to sleep on the floor at first, keeping as far from the bed as I could. But even then, I could hear it breathing. The quilt would rise and fall, steady as lungs pulling air, sighing in the dark as if disappointed I wasn't lying where I belonged. Sometimes, when exhaustion pulled me under, I'd wake to find myself closer than before. My body dragged inches toward the mattress without memory of moving. Once, I woke with my head resting on the pillow. Photographs scattered across my chest, each one showing me in that very pose. The photographs have multiplied. I don't know how. Each time I turn my head, new ones appear, fanned across the nightstand, tucked under the quilt, even taped to the walls. Everyone is me. Some sleeping, some smiling, some staring directly into the lens with eyes that look nothing like mine. They are not records of the past. They are promises of what's coming. My voice is fading. The air here is heavy, thick, pressing into my lungs until speaking feels like drowning. I try to scream, but the cabin swallows the sound, feeding it back to me as whispers from the corners. I hear my own words circling, repeated in tones that aren't mine, spoken by mouths I cannot see. The cabin is practicing, shaping my voice, tuning it until it sounds convincing enough to call someone else inside. I realize now that this is how it has always worked. Every name whispered in town, every warning disguised as rumor, every story told to keep people away. Those voices didn't belong to the living. They belonged to the ones trapped before me. their words echoing out, lures cast into the world beyond these walls. The cabin does not beg. It does not chase. It waits. And when it finds a voice it can use, it calls you here. I'm still in this room. If you're hearing this, it means the cabin has found a new mouthpiece. It means I'm speaking to you, whether I want to or not. Do not believe the comfort of the quilt, the warmth of the sheets. Once you step inside, the bed will be waiting. It always waits. And when it rises to breathe beneath you, you will not get up again. Where the morning had started clear, the ridge laid out in a ribbon of light, my group of 6 hikers following close behind me as we traced the narrow trail. The air was sharp, the kind that wakes every nerve, and the woods whispered in that calm way they sometimes do when the mountains are still. I had walked this path 100 times, knew where the rocks shifted loose, knew which bends gave sudden views of valleys below. There was nothing unusual about the day until the fog came. It did not creep in like normal mountain mist. It did not drift lazily from the hollows or melt away with the sun. It arrived like a wall, rolling thick and fast, swallowing the world in white. In minutes, the trail ahead vanished, the trees faded, and even the sound of our footsteps dulled as if buried in snow. The hikers bunched close, their voices jittering with nervous laughter. I told them it was fine, that fog in the mountains wasn't uncommon, though even as I spoke the words, something in my gut twisted. The silence was wrong. Usually, fog thickens sound, makes it echo in strange ways. But this was a deadening. Every shout I gave, every command to stay close, seemed to fall at my own feet, going no farther. The group moved like shadows behind me, figures half formed, and I counted them under my breath as we pushed forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4. I froze, my throat clenching tight. I turned, flashlight beam cutting through the milky haze, and there should have been 6 of us in total. But only 5 shapes stood in the fog. I barked the missing man's name, my voice louder now, more desperate. The fog parted for a breathless second, just enough for me to see the empty space where he should have been walking. His footprints stopped mid-trail, as if he had stepped into air. Panic flared in the group, their voices overlapping, some cursing, some crying. I forced calm, told them to hold the line, told them we'd find him. But my own heart pounded with a terror I couldn't hide. I knew these woods, I knew the trail, and no one simply vanished without sound, without struggle, without leaving the faintest trace. Yet here we were, and one of us was gone, as though he had never existed at all. The fog swirled again, pressing closer, the cold damp clinging to my skin until it felt like hands. In the whiteout, the hikers' faces blurred, each of them looking at me as though I could explain what had just happened. But I had nothing. Only the awful certainty that the fog was not weather. It was something alive, and it had chosen one of us already. We spent the next hours stumbling blindly, calling his name until our throats were raw. My voice cracked with each attempt, bouncing uselessly against the fog that swallowed sound whole. Every time I paused to listen, the silence pressed back harder, heavy and absolute, as though the forest itself resented the noise. The others followed close, their panic simmering into desperation. We tried to retrace the trail to find any sign of where he might have gone, but the fog kept twisting the world, bending familiar ground into strange shapes. Finally, the trees thinned, and we broke into a clearing. Relief washed over me for a heartbeat, but then my stomach turned cold. The earth here was soft with dew, smooth enough to show the print of every boot that had crossed it. His tracks led halfway across, crisp and clean. Then they simply stopped. No turn, no stumble, no scuff marks. Just a sudden end, as if he had walked into air and kept going. The others gathered around, voices low and frantic, asking how it was possible. I crouched down, running my fingers over the final impression of his heel pressed into the mud. It was real, solid, undeniable. And yet beyond that point, there was nothing. I turned in slow circles, scanning the clearing, praying for torn fabric, a dropped pack, anything to explain. But the grass stood undisturbed, the tree line unbroken. He had walked to the center of the clearing and vanished. I was about to tell the group to move on, to keep searching, when the sound came. A laugh, faint at first, then curling through the fog like smoke. It was his voice. There was no mistaking it. He laughed the way he always had, low and sharp, the kind of laugh that made you think he was about to tell a joke. But the sound didn't carry from one direction. It came from everywhere at once, rising from the trees, the earth, even the air itself. One of the women screamed his name and darted forward, but I grabbed her arm, holding her back. The laugh grew louder, but it twisted as it did, no longer familiar. The cadence was wrong, stretched thin, broken with odd pauses, as if someone were learning how to copy him and failing. It circled us, the group spinning helplessly, our flashlights cutting only empty fog. I shouted into the clearing, demanded he answer, demanded he show himself. The laughter stopped. For a long, brittle moment, there was only silence, so deep it made my teeth ache. Then close enough that I could feel the breath against my ear, the laugh came again, soft, wrong, and far too close. I spun, swinging the beam of my light, but there was nothing there. Only the clearing, only the tracks that ended in the middle of nothing, and the echo of a laugh that no longer belonged to the man we'd lost. The laughter didn't stop. It circled us, a sound without source, swelling and fading as though the fog itself was breathing it. Every direction I turned, the voice was there, slipping between the trees, echoing from the sky, curling up from the ground beneath our boots. We shouted until our voices broke, begging him to answer, to step into the light of our flashlights. But the only reply was that laugh. Too sharp, too stretched, like a recording played just a fraction too slow. Panic flared, but worse than panic was the way it began to fade from the others. Their shouts softened, their voices cracking into silence. One by one, they stopped calling his name, stopped demanding answers. Their faces turned blank, eyes clouding as they stared into the mist. I barked at them, shook their shoulders, pleaded for them to stay with me. But they only looked past me into the endless white. Their mouths parted like they were listening to something I couldn't hear, something private whispered only to them. The first man stepped forward without hesitation. He moved as though drawn by a string, his boots pressing into the soft earth as he walked straight toward the wall of fog. I lunged to grab him, but the mist closed around him like a door slamming shut, and he was gone. No scream, no sound, just absence. The woman who had nearly run to the laugh earlier followed next. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anything. She simply smiled faintly, eyes half-lidded as though in a dream, and walked into the haze. I shouted until my throat tore, begged her to stop, but she never faltered. One step, then another, then nothing. The fog devoured her. The others went the same way, each in turn, silent, docile, moving with that same strange certainty. It was like watching candles snuffed one by one, the small circle of humanity I had clung to dwindling until only I remained. Their shapes disappeared into the mist, and with each vanishing, the laughter grew louder, richer as though it fed on their surrender. I staggered back, clutching the useless flashlight in my hand, the beam barely piercing an arm's length through the fog. My breath came ragged, tearing at my lungs, and still the laugh spiraled around me. For the first time, I understood it wasn't meant for us to find him. It was meant for us to follow. I screamed until I could scream no more, my voice dissolving into hoarse gasps. The silence that followed pressed against my skull, a silence heavy with absence. And then, just as my knees buckled and the world tilted around me, the laugh came again, close enough to rattle in my chest. Only this time, it wasn't his voice. It was theirs, all of theirs, layered together, echoing in perfect unison, begging me to step forward and join them. The clearing was empty now, the ground scarred only by the footprints of those who had walked willingly into the mist. I stood alone, the silence pressing harder than any scream could have. My hands trembled around the flashlight, its beam flickering weakly, swallowed whole by the fog before it could reach more than a few feet ahead. My breath rasped in my ears, too loud, too frantic. And for the first time, I wondered if the forest had always been waiting for this. Waiting until I was the last one left. Then I heard it. My name, clear, sharp, spoken in a voice I knew better than any other, my own. It came from the fog, curling around me like smoke, mocking the way I had shouted for the others only hours before. "Come on," it called, the inflection perfect, the rhythm exact. My knees went weak. I spun in a circle, the light jerking wildly, but the fog was too thick to reveal anything. Again, my voice called, but this time it was softer, wheedling, begging me to follow. "Don't leave me here," it whispered, the exact words I had screamed when my friend disappeared into the white. My own pleas echoed back at me, turned cruel. The cold deepened, biting into my bones. It was not the natural chill of mountain fog, but something that clung and pulled, sinking talons into my skin. My body shook violently, not only from fear but from the sensation of hands pressing against me. Invisible fingers clawed at my arms, my shoulders, dragging me down toward the damp earth. My boots sank into the mud, though I had not moved, as if the ground itself wanted to pull me under. I clamped my hands over my ears, desperate to block out the sound, but the voice didn't fade. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside my skull, my own tone turning venomous. "You can't fight it. You belong here. Step forward." Each word made my chest tighten, my ribs straining as though something inside me was trying to break free. I staggered, knees buckling, and the flashlight slipped from my grip, clattering against the ground. Its beam swung upward, cutting through the fog, and for the briefest instant, I saw a figure. My figure, standing at the edge of the light, my face, my body, my stance. But the eyes were hollow, and the smile stretched too wide. I lunged for the flashlight, clutching it like a lifeline. But when I looked back, the figure was gone. Only the mist remained, swirling thick and slow, carrying the sound of my voice still calling. Louder now, harsher, promising that it would never stop until I stepped forward and became the echo myself. The fog has seeped into me. Now, it is not just around me, not just pressing against my skin. It is inside, thick and damp, clinging to my throat, filling my chest with a weight I cannot cough free. Every breath tastes of earth and rot, as though the hollow itself has chosen to breathe through me. My lungs burn, yet I cannot stop drawing it in. The more I resist, the deeper it forces itself, until my ribs ache like they are about to splinter. I have lost all sense of the trail. There is no ridge, no clearing, no trees. Only this shifting gray that stretches without end. My flashlight flickers weakly, its beam bouncing against nothing, swallowed whole before it can land on any surface. The ground beneath me feels soft, unsteady, as though I'm walking across a body of water without ever sinking. My legs tremble, not from exhaustion, but from the sensation of hands brushing against my ankles, unseen fingers tugging me down 1 inch at a time. The voice has not stopped. My own voice, sharp as a blade, circles me relentlessly. It pleads, it mocks, it begs. Sometimes it laughs the way my missing friend laughed, but it twists, curling back into my tone. I tried to shut my ears, to cover them with my palms until they throbbed, but the sound isn't outside anymore. It's inside, vibrating in my bones, humming in my teeth, filling the hollow of my skull until there is no room left for thought. I know what it wants. It wants me to surrender, to step forward willingly the way the others did, to vanish without a sound. That is why the footprints always end, why there is never a struggle. The fog does not drag. It convinces. It wears you down until you walk into it yourself. And once you do, you are no longer missing. You are part of it. A voice added to the chorus, a laugh stretched thin and fed back to lure the next wanderer. My knees are buckling now, every breath ragged with mist. I can feel it threading through me, veins filling with something colder than blood. My hand shakes as I scratch these words onto the page, the ink smearing in the damp. It takes everything I have to keep writing before my fingers go numb. So listen carefully if you find this. If you hike these trails and the mist gathers around you, do not call out. Do not answer. Do not follow the voices, even if they beg in the tones of those you love, even if it is your own voice echoing back. That voice is waiting, patient, smiling with hollow eyes in the fog. And if you take one step too far, it will not be me you hear anymore. It will be yourself, calling someone else to take your place. And it should have been routine. A hiker overdue, his family worried. The kind of call I'd taken dozens of times before. People get turned around in these mountains, lose track of time, sometimes underestimate how quickly the trails can swallow them. Usually, it ended with a tired man stumbling back down, embarrassed but alive. But when I reached his camp, I knew this would not end like the others. The site was too neat. His tent was still zipped, gear laid out with careful precision. Food sat on a small stove, untouched, not yet spoiled. The oddest thing was the boots, set side by side outside the tent flap, their leather still warm from his feet. He had left in a hurry, but not in panic. It was as if he had stepped out for a moment and simply never returned. I circled the camp slowly, scanning the ground for prints. The dirt was soft enough to hold them, but I found only his tracks leading into the pines, a clear trail that ended after a dozen steps. Beyond that point, nothing. No broken branches, no disturbed soil, no sign of where he had gone. It was as though he had walked into the trees and vanished into the air. The forest around me was too quiet. I've spent years in these woods, and silence like that is never natural. It wasn't the calm hush before a storm or the soft lull of dusk. This was the kind of silence that listens. Every hair on my arms rose as I scanned the tree line. The pines stood tall and rigid, their needles whispering against each other with the faintest breath of wind. I crouched, running my hand over the earth where the tracks ended, when I felt it. Eyes. I don't mean I saw movement, not then, but I felt them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, pressing down on me from above. I craned my neck and caught a glimpse of something carved into the bark of a tree overhead. A crude eye scratched deep, staring down at me with eerie intent. My chest tightened as I spotted another. then another. Every trunk around the camp bore the same mark, some fresh, others old and scarred. The eyes surrounded me, peering down from the pines. And though I told myself it was only vandalism, only the work of kids or superstitious hikers, I couldn't shake the sense that those eyes were more than symbols. The boots sat warm, the food waiting, the tent zipped as if expecting its owner to return. But he never would. And as I stood there, the weight of unseen eyes pressing deeper into me, I began to wonder if he hadn't simply disappeared. Perhaps he had been taken, not away from the forest, but deeper into it, to the place where the watcher waited among the pines. I pushed deeper into the pines, determined to follow what little trail I had. The ground was soft, scattered with fallen needles, and for a time the prints were clear. Each step pressed deep enough to suggest he had been walking steadily, not running, not staggering. I remember thinking he must have left the camp in calm, maybe even curious. But then the tracks simply stopped. One final impression of a heel pressed into the earth, and beyond it, nothing. No drag, no scuff, no sign of hesitation, as if he had stepped forward and never touched the ground again. I crouched low, tracing the edges of that last footprint with my fingers. My skin prickled as the air seemed to change, thickening around me. I had seen lost trails before, where prints vanish into rock or shallow water. But this was different. There should have been more. There should have been something. Instead, it looked as though the forest had swallowed him mid-step, lifted him out of reach of the earth. My light drifted upward, and that was when I saw them. The carvings. Eyes scratched into the bark of the pines, each one ragged and deep, the grooves cut by a blade or something sharper. Dozens of them, scattered at first, then hundreds, packed so tightly it was as if the trees themselves had grown eyes to watch me. Some were old, their edges weathered and gray. Others were fresh, sap bleeding from their wounds like tears. I spun slowly, my breath loud in the hush, and no matter where I turned, I found them staring back. Wide, unblinking, surrounding me on every trunk, every branch. The eyes followed me even when I tried not to look, burning into my skin with a weight I could not shake. The forest was no longer just trees. It was something else, something awake. I told myself it was vandalism, a ritual, maybe a warning left by someone who believed the stories too much. But the longer I stood beneath those carvings, the less convinced I became. The silence pressed in hard, so dense I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. I could not shake the feeling that the hiker had stopped here too, that he had looked up and seen the same sight I was seeing, and that was when the forest claimed him. The tracks ended beneath those staring eyes, and standing there, surrounded by wood that breathed with watching silence, I felt the first stirrings of a terrible truth. Missing hikers weren't vanishing by accident. They were being collected, chosen, and I had stepped into the same circle they had, with the watcher's gaze fixed on me. By the time the sun slipped behind the ridge, I had already retreated to base camp, my nerves scraped raw by what I had seen in the thickets. The eyes still burned in my mind, their crude shapes etched deeper than bark. I set my tent quickly, hands shaking as the shadows lengthened, and built a fire more for company than warmth. The flames sputtered against the chill, but no heat could touch the unease that clung to me. I told myself I would search again in the morning, that daylight would strip the woods of their menace. But as night pressed down, I knew daylight would never reach that deep. Inside the tent, I lay wrapped in my bag, the radio beside me, my flashlight clutched in one hand. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, the faint scrape of pine needles shifting. not in the scatter of wind, but in deliberate rhythm. Footsteps, slow and circling, pressing against the silence. I held my breath, straining to catch anything more. But the sound would fade, replaced by stillness so complete it felt like the forest itself had stopped breathing. Then, just as my body began to unclench, it would return. Step, step, step. Closer. I flicked my flashlight on more than once, slicing the darkness beyond the nylon walls. The trees swayed quietly in the glow, but nothing stirred between them. No animals, no figures, only silence broken by my own ragged breaths. I killed the light each time, heart hammering, ears wide open. And the moment the beam died, the footsteps began again. Near midnight, the radio at my side crackled. My chest leapt with hope. It could have been another ranger checking in, a voice to tether me back to sanity. I snatched it up, pressed the receiver close, whispered my call sign into the static. No reply came. The sound sputtered, hissed, and then I heard it. Breathing. Not the quick human kind that came from someone jogging or calling out. This was deep, deliberate, and wet, rattling like air dragged through lungs too heavy to lift. It filled the small speaker, each inhale and exhale scraping against my ears until I dropped the radio in panic. The noise continued, unbroken, as though the speaker itself had become the lungs of something unseen, something sitting just outside my tent. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound burrowed deeper, vibrating in my chest. The fire outside hissed and sputtered as if smothered. My tent walls trembled faintly, not with wind, but with presence. The faint outline of branches pressing against the fabric like reaching hands. I lay frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, while the radio on the floor whispered the rhythm of that endless breath. And I knew then the eyes I had seen carved into the bark were not only watching, they were waiting. And now, in the dark, the watcher had found me. When the first gray light of morning finally pushed through the canopy, I staggered out of the tent with eyes that felt bruised from a night without sleep. My limbs were stiff, my head pounding. But worse than exhaustion was the feeling that I had been watched the entire time, my every movement measured from the shadows. The fire was nothing but cold ash, though I swore I had fed it more than once. The radio lay dead, silent now, as if it had never carried the sound of lungs rasping in the dark. I forced myself to walk the perimeter of camp, telling myself it was protocol, that keeping busy would anchor me. But that's when I saw it. On the nearest pine, a carving so fresh, the sap still bled in sticky rivulets down the bark. At first, I thought it was another eye, another cruel mark among the countless others. But when I stepped closer, my stomach knotted. It wasn't an eye, it was me. The lines were crude but unmistakable. My ranger's cap, my jacket, the angle of my jaw. My own face stared out from the tree, etched with unnatural precision, as if the watcher had been studying me all night. The detail was too sharp for a vandal hacking blindly at wood. It was deliberate, practiced, the way an artist sketches something they know intimately. My throat dried as I traced the lines with trembling fingers. The sap smeared across my skin like blood. Then I saw the words cut deep beneath the figure. Not initials, not symbols, a message. 3 words, still raw with splinters, carved with a force that gouged through the bark into pale wood beneath. You're next. The world tilted. The air thickened until each breath scraped my lungs. I stumbled back, staring at that image of myself grinning from the trunk, and felt the pines close in tighter. Every tree around me blurred with eyes, hundreds of them, staring down from every direction. I felt their weight settle across my shoulders, pressing me lower, demanding submission. I wanted to believe it was a cruel trick, that some hiker with too much time and a knife had followed me, had been watching me from the dark. But no hiker could have captured the exact set of my mouth, the precise cut of my uniform, the way the firelight had caught my eyes in the night. No stranger could have carved me with such intimate detail. I backed away slowly, my boots sinking into damp earth, heart rattling in my chest. My reflection on that tree stared after me, smiling as though it already knew what I would do, how I would try to escape. And above it all, the forest whispered without sound, the pines leaning closer, as if waiting for me to step into the circle that had claimed all the others before me. I tried to leave. God knows I tried. I packed my gear in trembling hands, forced myself to keep my eyes from the carving on the tree, and headed for the trail that should have led me down the ridge. But the deeper I went, the more the path bent back upon itself. Landmarks repeated where they should not, a split oak appearing again and again, until I was certain I'd been circling for hours. The sun never rose higher, the light never shifted. The pines closed in tight, hemming me inside their endless walls. That was when I saw them. At first, I thought they were shadows, the way figures sometimes form in the corner of your vision. But when I turned, they stayed. Faces carved into bark, not static, not dead wood. They moved, they shifted. Their eyes blinked slow as centuries, mouths curling into thin, knowing smiles. I saw the hiker whose boots I had found. His face was there, etched into a trunk, eyes full of the same resignation that must have filled him when the Watcher took him. And behind him, others. Too many to count. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all woven into the flesh of the trees. The missing weren't gone. They had never been gone. They had joined the Watcher, their bodies surrendered to the pines, their eyes eternal, their voices whispering through the needles. And as I stumbled through that thicket of living faces, I understood the truth that had been pressing on me since the first night. The Watcher doesn't kill. It collects. I felt it claim me before I saw it. My breath seized, my limbs heavy, my skin tightening like bark splitting under the sun. The trees leaned closer, shadows wrapping around me like arms, and I could hear them. Voices rising in chorus, each one a memory of someone who had vanished. Their whispers sank into my ears, urging me to stop, to let go, to become still as they were. I tried to fight. I screamed until my voice shredded, but the sound twisted back, caught in the branches, thrown into the wind. It came back to me, not as my own voice, but as part of theirs, woven into the choir that has no end. I don't remember falling. I don't remember when my skin split or when the sap filled my veins. I only know that I'm here now. I can feel the grain in me, the roots tethering me deep. My eyes are open, always open, staring out from the bark, watching the next wanderer step into our circle. If you see the carvings, leave. Don't touch them. Don't linger. The pines don't just watch, they remember. And when they remember you, there's no leaving. Only silence, only wood, only eyes that'll never close again. The river had always been my escape. I knew its moods, its bends, the way the current quickened in spring and slowed in the heavy heat of summer. I'd taken groups down its spine for years, guiding tourists, church retreats, college kids eager for adventure, but unprepared for the silence of real wilderness. That autumn, the water ran low and dark. The banks crowded with skeletal trees shedding leaves that bled gold and rust into the current. It should have been an easy trip. Instead, it became the one I'll never forget. They were just kids, bright, laughing, restless in that way you can only be at 19. I split them into canoes, gave them the safety talk they barely listened to, and watched them push off from the bank with shouts echoing between the hills. I kept to the rear, my own canoe steady as I trailed behind. For the first few miles, it was ordinary. They splashed each other, raced along the calmer stretches, their voices carrying over the water. Nothing about it felt unusual, until the fog rolled in. It wasn't morning mist, not the kind that lingers low then burns away under the sun. This was thicker, stranger, pouring across the river in long tendrils that swallowed the sound of paddles striking water. One moment I could see them, their laughter sharp in the cool air. The next, their shapes blurred into white, their voices muffled as though wrapped in cloth. I paddled harder, trying to close the distance, but the fog only thickened, pressing cold against my skin. By the time it lifted, just minutes later, they were gone. No shouts, no splashes, no frantic calls for help. The river stretched empty before me, quiet as stone. Then I saw them. The canoes. They drifted slowly back, bumping against the rocks at the edge of the current. Their paddles lay across the seats, backpacks sat zipped, water bottles still full. Every canoe returned, empty and silent. I called out until my voice cracked, my shouts breaking against the cliffs. I paddled to each canoe, searching for signs, an overturned seat, a torn strap, anything that suggested panic or accident. But there was nothing. It was as though the river had lifted them out of their places without leaving a trace. The water was too calm for capsizing, too shallow to hide bodies. No ripples lingered, no bubbles rose. Only the current moved, carrying the empty canoes toward me with steady patience, as if returning what it didn't need. The river had taken them, and in that silence, with autumn leaves spinning across the surface, I realized it wasn't giving them back. The search began the moment word reached town. Rangers, deputies, volunteers. We combed the riverbanks, dragging nets through eddies, walking the ridgelines with dogs straining at their leashes. For 3 days, we scoured every bend, every sandbar, every snag of driftwood that might have caught a body. The air grew colder, nights sharper, but still we pressed on. The canoes lay stacked on the gravel bar near camp, mute reminders of the kids who should have been sitting inside them. I inspected them one by one, hoping for something we had missed. Most looked untouched, paddles still balanced neatly across the seats. But one held a mark I can never forget. Along the inside rim, where hands might grip in panic, the wood was gouged deep. Not the shallow scratches of gear tossed carelessly, not the scrapes of paddles dragged too roughly. These were claw marks, frantic and uneven, torn into the grain with such force splinters curled outward like jagged teeth. I ran my fingertips across them, the grooves fitting too easily, too perfectly, as though I could feel the desperation still vibrating there. Whoever made them hadn't been trying to steady themselves. They had been trying to get out, to escape something inside the canoe with them. I told myself it wasn't possible. Maybe the boat struck a rock, maybe the marks came from hauling it over a sharp ledge. But the pattern was wrong. They curved inward, hands dragged backward with such violence it raised the hair on my arms. Whoever left them had not been reaching for safety on the outside. They had been tearing their way free from within. At night, around the campfires where the volunteers whispered theories, I stayed quiet. Some said the kids had drowned and been carried off downstream. Others thought they ran off into the woods, drunk or high, vanished of their own choice. No one spoke of what the canoes themselves suggested. No one dared to say the river wanted them. that it could open itself and swallow a body whole, leaving behind only the shell of the vessel they came in. But I knew. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw pale fingers dragging splinters loose, nails bending back until they snapped. I heard the sound of frantic breath echoing in the hollow belly of the canoe, the muffled thuds of bodies thrashing against wood, and then silence. The marks are still there, carved deep into the grain, proof that something happened in those boats no one could explain. The river never gave back their bodies, never revealed its secret. It returned only the canoes, empty but scarred, and the one that bore the claw marks sits in storage to this day, a reminder that whatever took them did not come from above or below. It came from within. On the fourth night, after another day of fruitless searching, we camped along a wide bend where the water slowed and spread shallow across a bed of smooth rocks. The air was bitter, the kind that stings the lungs with every breath, and the fog hung low over the current. Most of the volunteers had gone home by then, their hope drained dry. But a few of us stayed, unwilling to leave the river unsolved. We sat close to the fire, our bodies huddled against the creeping chill, listening to the hiss of flames and the endless murmur of water. It was past midnight when the first voice rose, a faint cry, weak and breaking, carried on the current. "Help!" The word came from downstream, distant at first, but clear enough to freeze us in place. We turned as one, flashlights sweeping the rocks, but there was nothing out there. Only the rippling gleam of the river's skin. Then another voice joined it, higher, desperate, calling for a mother, calling for someone to grab their hand. We scrambled toward the bank, stumbling over stones, our beams cutting frantic circles across the water. The voices grew louder, closer, bubbling up between the rocks as though the river itself were speaking. Each cry came sharp, muffled beneath liquid, gurgling as if drawn through lungs filled with water. My heart thudded against my ribs as I knelt at the edge, ears straining to believe what I heard. They were the kids. Their words tore through the night, begging, choking, clawing for rescue. One of the deputies waded knee-deep into the current, his hands dragging through the black surface. "Hold on," he shouted. But the water gave him nothing. No hands reached up, no shapes broke the surface. Only the voices kept rising, echoing through the mist, circling around us until it felt like they were coming from every bend of the river at once. I leaned close. The rocks slicked beneath my palms, and I swear the water shifted under my face. A shape pressed just below the surface, pale and blurred, lips moving in silent prayer. For an instant, I thought I saw eyes open wide, staring straight into mine from beneath the current. Then the shape collapsed back into ripples, the voice splintering into 100 others, all crying together, all clawing upward with sound alone. We staggered back, hearts pounding, our fire snapping behind us. None of us spoke. None of us dared admit the truth our minds were already screaming. The river hadn't hidden their bodies. It hadn't carried them away. It was keeping them. Their voices were still inside it, trapped beneath the water, begging for air they would never breathe again. And as I stood on the rocks, staring into the black current, one thought rooted itself deep in my chest. If the river could take them, it could take anyone. All it needed was for you to lean too close when the voices called your name. The voices had grown louder that night, so loud they seemed to rattle the stones beneath our boots. They came from every direction, weaving through the fog like threads, tugging us toward the water's edge. Some begged for help. Some whimpered softly. Others screamed in a way that made my stomach twist, raw and ragged, as if their throats were still filling with river water. We stood in a line on the bank, flashlights trembling in our hands, and every one of us wanted to believe, needed to believe, that someone might still be saved. That was when Dan stepped forward. He'd been quiet most of the night, his jaw tight, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. When the cries of a young woman rose up, "Please, please don't leave me," he snapped. Dropping his pack, he rushed ahead, splashing into the shallows. We shouted after him, but his light was already cutting wild arcs across the current as he bent low, scanning the surface for the face that wasn't there. "Hold on," he yelled, voice hoarse. "I've got you." And then he was gone. No splash, no thrash, no sound of water breaking. One moment he was there, his boots planted against the slick rocks, his arm outstretched toward the black current. The next, he was simply gone, as though the earth had swallowed him whole. His flashlight dropped, clattering against the stones before it rolled into the river. The beam vanished instantly, consumed beneath the surface without so much as a ripple. We froze, unable to move, unable to believe what we'd seen. The river rolled on, calm, indifferent, carrying only the faint shimmer of moonlight. No bubbles rose, no current pulled. It was as though Dan had never stepped foot into the water at all. Then the voices changed. They rose together in a single cry, layered and twisted, dozens of them overlapping into one awful harmony. And within that chorus, his voice joined. I knew it. The sharp rasp in his throat, the panic clinging to every word. He called out from the river, begging for help, begging us to reach him, his cries already tangled with the others. One of the deputies fell to his knees, his hands in his hair, rocking back and forth as the voices swelled. I staggered back, heart pounding, bile burning the back of my throat. I wanted to run, to leave the river and never look back. But my boots felt nailed to the stones. The river had taken him as easily as it had taken the kids, without struggle, without resistance. It didn't drown. It claimed. And as the fog thickened around us, swallowing our fire and our breath, I knew the river wasn't finished. It was hungry, and it had just shown us how easily one wrong step was enough to join the voices that would never stop calling. I don't guide trips anymore. I tell people I retired, that I've had my fill of the river. But the truth is simpler. I can't bear to take anyone back there. Not after what I saw, not after what I still hear. I keep my canoe stored in the shed behind my house, the paddles stacked neatly against the wall. And yet, some nights when the air is cold and damp, I find myself dragging it out, setting it in the current, letting the water carry me into the dark. The river looks different now. To anyone else, it's the same stretch of Appalachian wilderness, the same black current running between pines and stone. But I know better. Its surface gleams like skin stretched too tight, hiding something restless beneath. I try not to look too closely, but when the moon cuts across the water, I sometimes catch the suggestion of faces just below. Mouths half open, eyes straining upward. If I blink, they're gone. But if I stare too long, the shapes sharpen and the voices return. They whisper from beneath the surface, soft at first, like the brush of reeds in the wind. Then they gather, swelling until they weave around me in dozens of tones, all begging, all pleading. Some are faint, echoes of those college kids whose canoes I found drifting empty. Others are sharper, fresher, voices I know, Dan's voice among them, raw with panic, calling for me to grab his hand. Their cries bubble up between the rocks, shivering against the hull of my canoe until I feel the wood hum beneath me. I press my hands over my ears, but it doesn't matter. the voices seep into my bones, into the hollow places of my chest, vibrating there long after I leave the river. At night, when I lie in bed, I hear them beneath the silence of the house, murmuring in the rhythm of running water. They do not fade with time. They only grow stronger, clearer, as though the river knows I am still listening. I tell myself I will never answer. I will never lean too close, never dip my hands into the black current, never let the water close over my face. But the truth is heavier, darker. The river waits. It remembers every step I've taken along its banks, every desperate search, every moment I stared into its depths. And it knows me. One day I fear the voices will no longer need to beg. One day I will set my canoe adrift and stop paddling, the current carrying me back to the place where the claw marks are still etched in wood. I will lean too close and the water will open. And when it does, my voice will join theirs, whispering up from the rocks, calling the next poor soul who dares to believe the river is only water. The trail I had been following cut off into nothing, swallowed by undergrowth and fallen pine. And yet the forest opened onto a clearing I had never seen, marked on any map. In the middle of it stood a church, its bones blackened with age, roof sagging, windows gaping with shards of stained glass clinging like broken teeth. Vines climbed the stone, curling into the cracks, but the doors were wide open as though it had been waiting for me. The sight of it made my skin prickle. There were no towns for miles, no roads, no signs that anyone had lived in this part of the mountains for generations. Yet something about the church seemed alive, not abandoned. The air was thick with the sweet, acrid smell of wax. And when I stepped closer, I saw the faint glow inside. Candles, dozens of them, their flames steady though no breeze stirred the clearing. Their light spilled out through the doorway, flickering against the damp stone like the pulse of a living heart. I hesitated at the threshold, my boots sinking into moss grown thick as carpet. The silence pressed down, heavier than the woods should ever allow, as if even the birds refused to sing here. My breath fogged in the air, though it was not cold, and with each exhale, the flames inside the church seemed to shiver. Inside, the pews stood in crooked lines, wood warped and splintered. Cobwebs draped from the rafters like funeral veils, but the floor had been swept clean. Wax pooled thick on every surface, dripping from the dozens of burning candles set upon the altar, the windowsills, even the floorboards themselves. Their flames bent toward me as I entered, not outward, as though pulled by my presence. I called out, half expecting some hermit to step from the shadows, some explanation for why this place still breathed when it should have rotted away. But no one answered. My voice echoed once, sharp and hollow, and then was gone, swallowed into the stone. The altar was the worst. Upon it lay a Bible, its pages bloated and yellow, though no dust clung to it. Its cover was warped, but the spine cracked open as if read often, too often, by hands that no longer lived. My eyes traced the words scrawled in the margins, written in a script I couldn't recognize. Sharp strokes etched over verses until they seemed to bleed through the page. The longer I stood there, the heavier the silence grew. It pressed into my ears, into my chest, until I felt my own heartbeat falter to match its rhythm. I knew I should leave, that the church was no relic of faith, but something else entirely. Something that had been abandoned and yet not left alone. And still the candles burned, steady and bright, though no hand had lit them. They burned for me. And in that moment, I realized the church had been waiting. I forced myself closer to the altar, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The Bible lay open, its pages curling at the edges as though they had been wet. But it wasn't the book that made my stomach twist. Scattered across the altar were photographs. Dozens of them, maybe more. Their edges blackened with soot. Each one weighted by a stub of candle burned almost to nothing. The faces stared up at me in grainy clarity. Men and women, young and old. Caught mid-smile and snapshots meant for wallets or family albums. Everyone bore the same mark. A cross of ash smudged over their foreheads, pressed hard as though someone had taken time to grind the symbol into their skin. I leaned closer, my throat dry. I recognized the first face immediately. A young woman with bright eyes and a defiant tilt to her chin. She had vanished last year on a trail I knew well. Her story whispered in the ranger stations and the small towns nearby. They never found her body. Yet here she was, pinned beneath candle wax, marked like the others. My fingers hovered over the photo, unwilling to touch it. But something drew me in. Against my better judgment, I pressed my hand to the picture. Heat surged through my palm, startling and real. Not the faint warmth of a candle nearby, but a pulse, as if blood still moved beneath that glossy surface. I snatched my hand back, my skin tingling, heart hammering as though I had just laid my fingers across living flesh. I shuffled through the others, each photograph cold at first glance, then warm to the touch, too warm. The ash crosses smeared faintly under my fingertips, leaving streaks on my skin like charcoal. I wiped my hand against my jacket, but the black smudge clung stubbornly, sinking into the lines of my palm. I wanted to tell myself it was coincidence, that these were only photos stolen from newspapers or copied from posters stapled to telephone poles. But the longer I looked, the more I knew that wasn't true. Some were faces I had never seen in any report. Men and women who had disappeared decades ago, their portraits too intimate to be public. Someone had collected them, cataloged them, placed them here like offerings. A draft stirred through the ruined church, though no windows gaped wide enough to explain it. The candles guttered, their flames bowing toward the photographs, and for a breathless moment I swore I heard whispers. Not voices from the rafters, but low murmurs rising from the altar itself. I bent close despite the weight pressing down on my chest, and the warmth of the photographs grew stronger, as though every face leaned toward me, pleading, warning. I stumbled back, my breath jagged, but I couldn't shake the truth carved into me in that silence. These weren't memorials. They weren't prayers. They were proof. The missing weren't lost to the forest. They had been claimed, one by one, and marked in ash to show they belonged to whatever still burned inside this church. The first note shook through the church so low it rattled in my ribs. I froze, eyes darting to the far corner where the organ leaned in decay, its pipes cracked, its keys buried beneath dust. No hands touched it. Yet the sound rose again, deeper this time, rolling through the hollow nave in waves that made the candles shiver. The rotten walls groaned in answer, vibrating with each heavy chord as if the whole structure was an instrument, tuned to some forgotten hymn. I stumbled backward from the altar, the photographs trembling under the force of the sound. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Who's there?" But no one answered. The organ did. Its notes climbed, slow and deliberate, forming a melody that was not holy but broken, each chord fractured into something darker. Then the shadows moved. Along the crooked pews, shapes began to rise. At first, I thought it was the candlelight tricking my eyes, stretching the darkness into impossible lengths. But as the music swelled, the shadows thickened, coalescing into figures that bent and knelt between the rows. Dozens of them, maybe more. their outlines human, but wrong. Headless, faceless, their bodies swayed in rhythm to the organ's hymn. The sound of wood creaked as they dropped to their knees, the congregation of emptiness worshiping in silence. Their motions were slow, deliberate, the kind of mechanical devotion that belongs to something long dead. My breath hitched as I watched their arms rise and fall, as though they clutched hymnals that weren't there, their mouths opening where mouths should not be. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart battering against bone. But the shadows paid me no mind. They were fixed on the altar, swaying in unison, the ash-marked photographs glowing faintly in the candlelight. The organ's song grew louder, its keys hammering faster, vibrating the floor until dust rained from the rafters. I could taste it in the air, mildew and ash and something copper, like blood long dried. One of the figures turned, or at least I thought it did. Its faceless void angled toward me, and though there were no eyes, I felt its gaze burrow into me, sharp as needles pushing beneath my skin. The sway of the others slowed, their movements faltering as though they sensed the same thing. For the first time, I felt seen, not by the living, not by God, but by whatever haunted this ruin. The organ pounded, louder and louder, a hymn rising to fever pitch. The shadows leaned forward on the pews as though they were about to stand, as though they might finally reach for me. My knees buckled, my body begging me to run. But the doorway behind me gaped black, and I knew if I turned my back, they would follow. The silent church had gathered its congregation, and for the first time since I stepped inside, I realized it was not waiting for prayer. It was waiting for me to kneel. I bolted from the altar, stumbling down the aisle, the shadows swaying on either side like rows of mourners rising to watch me pass. The organ roared, its song thickening into something almost triumphant, each note crashing against the walls until my teeth ached. The open doors yawned ahead, the only way out, the night beyond them black, but blessedly free of candles and whispers. I threw myself forward, hands outstretched, only to hear them slam. The sound echoed like thunder. Wood and iron crashed together, the vibration shaking through the rotten floorboards. I skidded to a halt, the last inches of freedom vanishing before my eyes. I slammed my palms against the doors, clawed at the handles, shoved with all my weight, but they didn't move. It was as if they had been sealed from the outside, or worse, as though the church itself had decided I wasn't leaving. Behind me, the congregation stirred. The shadows no longer swayed in silence. They rose from their kneeling, faceless heads tilting back as one. From the black voids where mouths should not be, a single sound poured forth. My name, spoken in unison, drawn out in a low chant that shook the air. The voice was not theirs alone. It was layered, as if carried by countless throats, men, women, children, all folding into one ceaseless prayer. My name rolled through the church again and again, each repetition heavier than the last, dragging me down with its weight. I pressed my hands tighter to the door, nails splitting as I clawed the wood, but the chant filled me like a second heartbeat. I turned, gasping, and the shadows were closer now. They filled the pews, spilling into the aisle, kneeling again, but this time in deliberate unison, as if I had arrived at last. Their arms lifted high, reaching toward the altar, toward the ash-marked photographs, toward me. My name grew louder in their chant, a litany I could not escape. It was no longer just a sound, it was a claim. The candles guttered and surged brighter, their flames bowing with the rhythm of the chant, each flicker synchronized with the voices. The organ thundered like a storm behind the walls, shaking plaster loose in clouds that fell around me like ash. My body went weak, my knees bending against my will, dragging me downward. I clutched the doorframe, desperate to resist, but the prayer clawed into me, whispering that I had always belonged here, that my photograph would soon lie warm upon the altar. My name was theirs now, etched into the silence, bound to the church's hymn. And as I sagged against the sealed doors, I understood with a dread deeper than fear. This congregation had not been waiting for worshipers. They had been waiting for me. I don't remember how I left. One moment I was pressed against the sealed doors, my name rising and falling from the mouths of shadows, and the next I was stumbling into the forest, gasping for air that burned my lungs. My ears rang with the organ's hymn, though when I looked back, the church was gone. The clearing was empty, the trees unbroken, as though the building had never stood there at all. And yet, I can still feel the weight of its walls pressing against me, the candlelight burning my skin. Sometimes, at night, I wake to the smell of melted wax, sharp and cloying in the dark of my room. My ears prick for sound, and there it is, the faint toll of bells. Not the bright clang of a town steeple, but something low and rusted, ringing across miles of forest to find me. Each toll feels heavier, slower, like it counts down rather than calls the faithful. I know now what those bells mean. They are not for worship. They are not for prayer. They are for the missing. Each strike marks a name, a life folded into the congregation of shadows kneeling in the pews. The photographs prove it. Every one of them had been called by that sound, drawn into the ruin, their names spoken until they belonged to the church. I have never gone back. God help me, I never will. But the church does not need me to return. It waits, patient and silent, for others to stumble across its open doors. The forest changes, trails shift, and sometimes hikers find themselves in places not meant to be found. That is how I found it. That is how they all do. And if you find yourself there, if you step into a clearing and see the ruined walls, the doors standing wide, the candles burning though no hand lit them, you must turn back. Do not enter. Do not cross the threshold, no matter how the silence calls. Because once you are inside, the church will know your name. It will mark you as its own, and no map will lead you home again. When the bells toll, they toll for the missing. And one day soon, they will toll for me. I hear them each night, closer, sharper, dragging through my bones like rusted chains. The congregation has not forgotten me, even if I fled. My photograph already waits on the altar, warm to the touch, ash cross pressed into my forehead. If you find the church, do not enter. The bells do not call the faithful. They call the lost. And the moment they toll for you, the silence will close in, the doors will slam shut, and the shadows will rise to kneel. And then, you will never leave. Now, the night he vanished, he told me he had seen them again. Lantern lights drifting along the ridgeline, weaving between the trees where no trail ran. He laughed when I told him it was nothing, just fireflies, or maybe hunters with their gear. But I saw the way his eyes shone, hungry with belief. He said they called to him, that they wanted him to follow. By morning, his truck was still parked at the trailhead. His boots were gone. He never came back. For weeks, I told myself the mountains had claimed him the way they had claimed others. Black Mountain had its share of missing persons, and the stories always ended the same. No trace, no sound, no explanation. But I couldn't let it go. He was my brother. His absence wasn't just another whisper for the rangers to shrug at, another poster stapled to a gas station wall. It was a hole inside me, raw and echoing. And so I returned to the ridge. Everyone warned me not to. The old men in town shook their heads when I asked about the lights. Some wouldn't look at me at all. One woman muttered that the lanterns weren't lanterns, that no one who chased them ever came back whole. I ignored them. I packed a lantern of my own, a knife, and his photograph folded into my jacket pocket. I told myself I was going to find him, or at least proof of what took him. The trail up was quiet, too quiet for autumn. No deer startled at my steps, no owls hooted. Even the wind felt hushed, as though the ridge itself was waiting. My lantern's glow spilled across roots and stone, and every time the light flickered, my heart jolted, half expecting to see him step out of the dark with that same crooked grin. Near the summit, the air grew colder, and then I saw them. Lanterns, dozens of them. They hung low, swaying gently, their glow pale and unsteady like fireflies trapped in glass. They bobbed in the trees, always just far enough to stay out of reach, always moving when I did. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I thought I was seeing him, standing among them, his silhouette framed in the glow. But when I called his name, the lights flickered and shifted deeper into the woods. I should have turned back. Every warning screamed in my head, every story I'd heard thrummed in my blood. But the lanterns pulsed brighter, as if beckoning me. And I thought of his photograph, folded warm in my pocket. My brother had gone after them, and if I wanted to bring him home, I would have to follow. So I stepped off the trail and into the dark, where the last light on the ridge waited for me. The ridge was painted in dying colors when the first light stirred. Dusk stretched long shadows across the trees, turning the pines into black spires against a bruised sky. My lantern cast a weak glow at my feet. But ahead of me, something brighter stirred. Small orbs drifted between the trunks, pale and trembling, swaying in the gloom like they were caught on invisible strings. They looked fragile, almost delicate. Yet each pulse of their glow tightened something in my chest, pulling me forward before I realized I was moving. At first, I told myself they were fireflies, nothing more. But fireflies don't burn steady, and they don't hang in the air like glass lanterns swaying in a wind that doesn't exist. I tried to steady my breathing, but the air was wrong. It stank faintly, sharp and acrid, like old smoke soaked into wood. Beneath it lingered another scent, heavier, rot, clinging to the back of my throat until I gagged. Still, the lights drifted deeper into the trees, bobbing slowly, inviting me. I thought of my brother, of how he must have seen them, standing where I stood now, caught by their shimmer in the dimming woods. Had he felt this same tug, this same pull that made my body betray me, one step closer, then another? I gripped the strap of my pack hard enough to hurt, trying to anchor myself. But the lights pulsed in rhythm, and each flicker made the forest around them disappear. For moments at a time, all I could see was their glow, as if the ridge itself had vanished, leaving only me and the impossible orbs. I whispered his name, half hoping the lights would answer. The trees shivered, though no wind stirred, and the smell of smoke thickened. My eyes watered, my throat burned, but I couldn't stop staring. More lights appeared now, weaving through the branches, circling like moths. A strange dizziness swept through me, like I was being lulled into some rhythm I didn't understand. The forest floor tilted, the world narrowing to their pale glow, and I had the dreadful sense that if I blinked too long, I would open my eyes somewhere else, entirely. I turned once, just once, to look behind me. The trail was gone, swallowed by shadows that pressed tight and endless. Only the lights remained to guide me, swaying patiently, waiting. My skin prickled with heat, though the air was cold, as though unseen hands pressed against my back, urging me forward into their glow. The ridge was silent except for the faint hiss of something smoldering unseen, the smell of rot growing thicker with every step. The lanterns bobbed ahead, pulsing in time with my breath, in time with my heart, as though they already knew the pace of my body. And even as fear rose sharp and bitter inside me, I knew the truth with a clarity that cut like glass. My brother had followed them too, and if I wanted to find him, I would have to let them lead me deeper into the dark. The higher I climbed, the more the forest shifted. The lantern lights swayed ahead of me, always just out of reach, their pale glow spilling across the trunks like liquid. I told myself I would stop if I found nothing, that I'd mark the path and turn back. But with each flicker, my resolve thinned. My legs moved without command, dragging me uphill as though the ridge itself had taken hold of my spine. That was when I saw the first shoe. It dangled from a low branch, the laces knotted tight around the bark. Mud still clung to its sole, dried stiff, as though it had been taken from the foot of someone mid-step. A few paces further, another branch bore a shirt, ripped down the middle, sleeves fluttering faintly in a wind I couldn't feel. Beyond it, wallets cracked with age swung from twine, their empty mouths gaping open. I slowed, my stomach twisting. More belongings littered the trees, jackets, hats, scraps of fabric torn into ribbons and tied like offerings. Some looked decades old, sun-bleached and brittle. Others were fresh, colors still sharp, stitching unfrayed. It wasn't random. Each item was hung carefully, displayed like a warning or a shrine. My breath quickened, fogging in the cold air. I reached for one of the wallets, my hand trembling as I flipped it open. Inside was an ID card, its photograph blurred, but the name still legible. My throat closed. I knew it. I had seen it stapled to missing person flyers in town. Another hiker gone without a trace, his family still searching the woods long after the rangers gave up. And here he was, or what was left of him, tied to a branch on Black Mountain. The smell of smoke thickened, curling into my nostrils, coating the back of my tongue. Beneath it, the rot grew stronger, sour and heavy, like something long dead left to fester. My head swam, vision tilting as the lights drifted further uphill. They pulsed brighter, waiting, and the pull inside me deepened until I felt hollow without them. I whispered my brother's name again, the sound breaking in my throat. For a moment, I thought I heard him answer. Not from behind me, not from the trail I had lost, but from ahead, in the same direction. The lanterns floated. His voice, faint and strained, wrapped itself around my chest and tugged. I should have turned back. I should have run, even if I had to tear my own legs bloody on the underbrush. But my feet lifted again, one step, then another, carrying me past the hanging offerings of the lost. The lights swayed above me like stars caught in branches, patient and sure. And though terror gnawed at me with every heartbeat, I could not stop. Whatever had taken the others had already chosen me. The climb seemed endless, each step heavier than the last, the air thick with smoke and rot. The lanterns pulled me higher, bobbing patiently through the trees until the ridge broke open into a clearing. My chest heaved, legs trembling. But the moment I stepped onto that flat crown of earth, the lights stopped. They hung in the air above me, dozens of them, swaying in perfect rhythm, their glow forming a circle that pulsed like a heartbeat. I froze. In the center of that circle, shapes stirred. At first they looked like shadows, cut sharp against the pale glow, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw faces. Dozens of them. Pale, stretched thin, their skin gray with something more than death. Their eyes glowed faintly, the same color as the lanterns, and their mouths gaped open in silence. No breath, no sound, only the faint shimmer of light bleeding from their throats. I recognized them. Not all, but enough. The missing hikers whose faces had stared out from posters on gas station walls. The woman from last year, the man from the wallet I had found tied to the branch. Even a child whose name had haunted the town for decades. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their bodies swaying slightly like reeds in still water. None of them blinked. None of them moved toward me. They simply stood within the circle of light, their empty mouths hanging open as though waiting to scream, but held back by something I could not see. My breath came shallow, my body begging me to turn, to flee, but my feet refused. The lanterns flickered, and in their glow, I saw the faint outlines of more figures behind the first line, packed tightly, dozens more lost souls pressing inward. The ridge was filled with them, an audience of the vanished, their eyes glowing in the dark like coals smoldering at the bottom of a pit. I whispered my brother's name, my voice breaking, and one of the figures tilted its head, just slightly, just enough to make the bile rise in my throat. His face, hollowed, pale, eyes burning with the same glow as the others. His mouth opened wider, too wide, but still no sound escaped. I wanted to run to him, to drag him free from the circle, but the lights brightened, burning hot, warning me without words that the circle could not be broken. The silence was worse than any scream. It pressed into my skull, filled my chest, until I thought I would collapse under the weight of it. My brother stood among them, eyes fixed on mine, and I knew then that he was gone. Whatever those lights had promised, whatever they had lured him with, had already hollowed him out. And yet, even knowing that, I could not turn away. The circle had opened for me, and the faces inside the light were waiting for me to step in. His face glowed faintly in the pale shimmer, drained of the warmth I had known, but still his, my brother. His eyes burned with the same light as the others, hollow yet fixed on me, and when his hand lifted, it trembled in a way that broke something inside my chest. He was reaching for me, calling me without words, begging me to close the distance. I stepped forward against every instinct, against the thunder of my pulse screaming to turn and run. His hand hovered just beyond the circle of light, waiting. I told myself if I could just touch him, if I could just pull him free, maybe I could bring him back, maybe I could save him. The moment our skin met, the world collapsed into cold. Not the sharp bite of mountain air, not the sting of frost. This was deeper. My hand froze instantly, the chills sinking through flesh into bone, spreading through me like cracks in ice. My breath caught in my throat, lungs locking as though the air itself had turned solid. His grip tightened, not warm, not living, but firm, impossibly strong. I tried to pull away, but the cold held me, drinking the heat from my body in greedy gulps. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw him change. His lips quivered as though trying to form my name. His eyes flickered with something that almost looked like memory. But then, the light in his face flared brighter, swallowing everything else. His mouth stretched wide again, too wide, the glow spilling from his throat until I could see nothing else. The others leaned closer, their arms rising in unison. their mouths gaping. 1,000 silent screams pressed against me, and in their glow, I understood. The lights don't lead you out. They never have. They lead you into the circle, into the waiting congregation of the lost. My brother had not been taken. He had been brought home, and now the circle wanted me too. I tore myself free, the skin of my palm burning raw where his fingers had seared into me. I stumbled backward, the lanterns flaring with anger, their glow stretching long across the ridge. My legs carried me without thought, crashing through branches, tumbling down the slope. I never remembered finding the trail again, never remembered leaving the mountain. All I know is that I woke at dawn with pine needles in my hair, the smell of smoke still clinging to my clothes, and the cold carved deep into my bones. But sometimes, in the dark, I feel his hand still gripping mine. My skin tingles with frost, my lungs tighten with silence, and I see the lantern swaying just beyond the window, waiting, patient, eternal. One day I know I'll follow them back, and when I do, I won't be let out. I'll be let in.